Today is November the 27th, 2020. This is Addison Shonland, and my guest today is Rodger, who is CEO and MD of Airlink, an airline based in South Africa. Rodger, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me, Addison. It's a privilege.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so my first item that I'm really intrigued about is with SAA increasingly looking like it will not come back as anything like its former self. How can Airlink take advantage of that?
Addison, firstly, it's our expectation, having had knowledge of the several announcements made by the South African government, that at some point in time in the not too distant future, South African Airways will be operational once again. Having said that, we intend continuing our own business at our own pace, focusing on optimizing what we do best and turning ourselves into the best form of ourselves that we can possibly be in the current environment. We have been accumulating international traffic rights as part of an age-old strategy that we developed within our organization some 25 years ago. And we have a very comprehensive arsenal of international traffic rights throughout the sub-region. And in the absence of South African Airways, we intend exploring those traffic rights and entrenching ourselves in as many markets as we possibly can in the best interests of promoting Airlink as a comprehensive airline network system. And that's our immediate vision.
So if I understand correctly, the primary opportunity for Airlink right now is beyond the borders of South Africa.
Yes, although the comprehensive airline network objective is not limited to over border. We need a domestic network. There are key points within South Africa that are intrinsic to our long-term network objectives. Those key points include the routes Johannesburg-Cape Town, Johannesburg-Durban, Johannesburg-Port Elizabeth, Johannesburg-East London, as well as all of the routes that have previously existed within the airline network system that Airlink has operated. Bearing in mind that previously Airlink was a component of a composite airline network system, it is our view that we now need to be an independent airline and a comprehensive airline network system of our own. That airline network system will comprise domestic destinations, as per those that I've just shared with you now, as well as regional or international destinations within the sub-region of Southern Africa. And those will include routes like Johannesburg-Harare, Johannesburg-Lusaka, Johannesburg-Maputo, Johannesburg-Gaborone, Johannesburg-Windhoek, Johannesburg-Dar es Salaam, Johannesburg-Luanda, Johannesburg-Entebbe, Johannesburg-Kigali, and we're already well entrenched on that strategy. We embarked on it some time ago, and already we are comprehensively involved in the route network that I've mentioned to you.
Right, and you're going to bring back St. Helena too, I hope, because that was outside of South Africa, that was a big moment for your brand beyond the borders.
Yes, one obviously looks at it as an operational endeavor, but at the same time as a commercial endeavor. And working closely with the St. Helena government, which is an extension of the UK government, has been a privilege, frankly, because in many ways our downside risk has been mitigated. From an operational point of view, it's been quite sensational that we've been able to mount a service from Johannesburg and operate with a technical stop in Namibia, and then go on to this very remote, tiny little island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So we've got much mileage and credibility out of that, and I think that it's helped Airlink to promote its own brand. We look forward to getting back into St. Helena. At the moment, services to St. Helena are not permitted for the simple reason that there is a quarantine requirement. It's mandatory, and the quarantine facilities on St. Helena are limited, and therefore they are unable to accommodate air services from South Africa to St. Helena in the immediate term. They will start again from February.
Rodger, when one looks at, and obviously the elephant in the room is SAA, how much time do you think you have to exploit all the opportunities before some sort of SAA reemerges?
Addison, we don't really look at it as SAA's re-emergence or resuscitation as a limitation to us. As I said before, we've got to focus on being the best form of ourselves we possibly can be. We have established Airlink now as an independent brand. We forged new commercial relationships with global partners, the likes of Qatar and Emirates and Air France, KLM, United Airlines, British Airways, and so on. And, we're going to concentrate on our business, whether or not South African Airways gets back into business. And, we'd welcome them to come back. It seems that, the government has intentions of looking after the best interests of the country, and they believe that it is in the best interest of the country to have a resuscitation of South African Airways. We don't necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, that's not what is important. What is important from our perspective is to promote ourselves, as I said, in the best form of ourselves we can possibly be. And that means we need to take on competition, and we're ready to do that, to outperform the competition. And, without sounding arrogant in any way, it goes about delivery of service to our traveling public, but it also goes about establishing trust in your brand. And that's what we really focused on.
So you mentioned the word competitor. I'm trying to figure out how it must be for you to have gone from competing with a state-owned airline and other private airlines to an environment now where you compete with private airlines and no state-owned airlines. Has that created any kind of difference in terms of pricing and market behavior?
Well, it does, because every private airline has a profit imperative. And it seems that historically, state-owned enterprise airlines don't seem to have a profit imperative, because there's been a continuum of subvention by the shareholder, being the state, whichever state that may be. And I'm not having a dip at South African Airways at this point in time. I'm just merely stating the obvious and the fact relating to many other national carriers that have existed on the basis of state funding. So we have at the moment many of the state airlines that have operated within the sub-region have remained in hibernation. Who knows when they can resuscitate their operations again. And it's a lot more comprehensible for us to be able to compete with private airlines on the same level playing field versus state airlines that have the subsidy and, as I said, can do what we believe constitutes antitrust behavior in the form of their pricing and how they position their product to the market without having to cover at least their average avoidable costs, where we do. So I find the playing field where you're pitting private participant against private participant is a lot more level than it is when you have the contamination in the market of participants who are subsidized.
Right. It must be like refreshing, really, to have rational competitor as opposed to potentially irrational competitor.
Exactly that. And Addison, one has to also bear in mind that in the very tough competitive arena that we exist in within South Africa, there is a lot of hype and anxiety about getting back into the business as quickly as possible. And we see newcomers coming in. We see participants that have been in hibernation for a long period of time getting back into the game. And, as we can note and talk to any of the top economists in the world, and especially locally here in South Africa, they'll inform you that the market isn't what it was, not only in terms of the ability of consumers to spend. The market has shrunk. By IATA's definition, the market is, in terms of revenue measured, only approximately 45% at the international level as to what it was at this time a year ago. And we see that in the South African domestic market, there is already on the trunk routes about as much capacity right now as there was this time a year ago. And certainly for December, this coming December, there's going to be an equal amount, or the amount this December is going to exceed the amount of capacity that was in the market last December. And for me, it's incomprehensible that new participants are willing to take the risk of their economic viability and sustainability in a market which we know is compromised, where we keep on adding capacity to the same market, expecting that the market is going to respond in an elastic way to price. And yes, the market is elastic, but we don't believe that the market has the carrying capacity to absorb all of this amount of airlift capacity.
Right, which only leads back to the irrational behavior in terms of probably pricing.
It is, and I think it epitomizes the anxiety for people to get back into business as quickly as they can to participate in the economy. But as I said, the economy can't carry this amount of capacity. So it is irrational at the moment, and hopefully the market forces will level the industry. And we're not quite sure how that's going to look in the future, but we do believe that there has to be some rationalization and some sensibility.
Right. Bob Crandall, when he was running American Airlines, had a great line. He said, "It's death by 1,000 cuts." So yeah, I hear what you're saying now. When you mentioned the capacity issue, which is really something I was going to move on to next. Your company flies Embraers, and Embraer has been making a very strong case for the term right sizing. And when I look at the market that you're flying in, it seems to me that as the lockdown is eased and travel starts to pick up again, your airline has the most right-sized fleet and has the lowest break-even load factor necessary to actually make it a going concern. Is that reasonable?
Addison, we believe that as well, and that's the reason why we have the fleet that we do. We have a few gauge sizes in fleet. Our smallest entry gauge is 37 seats, and we operate up to 98 seats in the form of the Embraer E190. An important consideration is frequency of service onto a market. A market has multiple facets. It's complex. You may have business travel requiring there and back in the same day. You may have travelers wishing to connect to an onward destination, and you thereby need to be able to address the market on the premise of frequency. So we regard frequency as one of the imperatives. And if you're going to operate any market with the frequency that the market needs, then you need to be able to right-size the gauge to the market's needs at that specific time of the day.
Right.
To provide onward connection, to provide interconnection from one airline to another, from one global hub to another, and so on. We believe that our fleet of Embraers and the mix of gauge that we have within the fleet gives us the ability to comprehensively right-size the capacity to the market's needs at the right time of the day. And that applies generally to most of the markets that we provide services to throughout our comprehensive network of over 60 routes throughout the sub-region. Having said that, we are at a disadvantage on certain routes, certainly the most voluminous routes, where we find that our major competitors are low-cost carriers, obviously offering a completely different value for money proposition than what we do, where the interiors of those aircraft are densified, and they thereby are able to deliver a much lower unit cost once amortizing all of the variable and fixed costs into the total operating costs. Our model is quite different from that, and we look at trip costs as being a risk element, and as long as we can cover the trip costs and make contributions beyond the direct variable costs towards the fixed costs and the overhead, then we're happy to be in those markets, albeit that we know that we are in those markets at a price competitive disadvantage to our peers who are low-cost carriers. How we get around that is by offering the network. A lot of those markets are high density markets, and being dense, we often find that they source markets for destinations beyond our main hub, Johannesburg, or for that matter, Cape Town. And so we offer the network, and we also offer a value for money proposition that the low-cost carriers cannot compete with. And what I mean by that is we offer a window or an aisle, never a middle seat. So in a low-cost carrier, at least 1/3 of the seat are compressed between two other seats, and that's not always the most comfortable. And without demeaning low-cost carriers in the spacing, there's never enough legroom. We've got legroom in our aircraft. And then we go beyond that and we actually deliver an onboard service. And we don't charge for the luggage that gets put into the hold or the sports equipment that gets put into the hold. And over time, as we attract more and more customers, we end up having some kind of loyalty in following the value for money proposition that we offer attached to our brand. And that's what's gaining impetus over time. And we're quite pleased about that. That gives us the ability to stay in the markets where the low-cost carriers are waging the bloodbath as it stands.
Right. So this leads me to my final question about, obviously, opportunities is knocking for you right now, and jumping ahead while you can is key. So the question I have for you is growth in your fleet, and especially given the fact that you're looking longer range, you're looking up the map of Africa towards the equator, and for example, Lagos would be a great market for you, which presupposes that you're looking at the E2. Is that a question you can talk about? I see your smile. So, I mean, it's not the first person that's asked you the question, probably.
Addison, sometimes a no answer is also an answer. I am going to give you an answer, though. I think for now, our focus is to get right what we're busy with. I think the global aviation industry has been decimated. We all know this. I think survival is foremost on our minds. And yes, there are opportunities for growth and expansion. We recognize them. We need to nurture our balance sheet and acknowledge that our runway is limited. And we need to make sure that we've got maximized power for takeoff, and that we comply with all of the restrictions that we are confronted by as it stands at the moment. And what I'm getting to is we have the main mission at the moment as survival. Part of survival goes about the footprint that we've been able to create at the domestic level, which includes the trunk routes, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, East London, and so on. But our emphasis has to be focused on what happens in the region. And right now we have this unique opportunity to expand Airlink into the region. And it probably means that in the short to medium term, we need to be thinking very, very carefully and very seriously and very quickly about fleet expansion. And that is something that is on the agenda right now. We need more airlift capacity to be able to address some of the markets where we've already got traffic rights and designations to operate. And that's what we're going to be doing. That fleet augmentation is likely to be a continuation of the E-Jet 190 program, and it could even include E-Jet 195s. But that will be the E1 version of the E-Jet and not the E2 version of the E-Jet in the short to medium term. And the reason why is because we're limited by our balance sheet and debt equity ratios and financial covenants, and we're going to live within that until we're in a position where our balance sheet is nurtured and we are reinstating the equity growth on our balance sheet. And once that happens, then we can start thinking about the next step, which will in all probability be an aircraft with longer legs than the E190, and that could well be the E2 190 or 195. It's unlikely at this stage, although we have a lot of internal debates about it, that Airlink will be embarking on a narrow body jet program, such as, for example, the 738 or the A320. That's not on the cards for now. I think that we will reconsider that once the business is safely and robustly stable. And we expect that that could happen within the next 6 to 12 months, depending on whether we have a second wave of COVID-19 infection within the sub-region. And we are expecting that that is a risk and a potential threat. So we have to contemplate that anything that we do in the way of growth into the market opportunities that are available to us right now has regard for the possibility that things could go negative before they go positive again.
All right, Rodger, that's very good. Thank you for sharing some time with me and being so forthcoming.
Thank you, Addison, and thanks for having me.